Okay, hello, anyone who will watch this. Hello, Dill.
Hi.
It's lovely to see you. This is Dylan McGarry, everyone. My name is Dave.
Hi,
I'm
guys.
coming from Noordwest, Northwest Province. Dill's down in the Eastern Cape, in Makanda. And yeah, it's lovely to have another incredible guest and fellow friend and fellow researcher, fellow being on this interesting little platform, podcast, videocast experiment. Um, Dill is a person who I was introduced to through my friendship with Guy Buttery, who is another close friend of Dill's. And yeah, it was a beautiful thing getting to know someone's art and drawings before you actually meet the person. So wandering around Guy's house, I would see all these wonderful artworks that Dylan had made. And yeah, I met Dylan the first time was at one of my sessions with Guy. So one of the yoga and music sessions. And we kept in touch a little bit. I remember speaking to you about Lebanon because you did some amazing things there.
Yeah.
And then we finally really connected on a phone call. And then I asked you to be a part of the Deep Retreat team, which we hosted last year in December, and another one coming up now. So I wanted to invite Dill on. I wanted to invite you on, Dill, to talk a little bit more about what you do, what you share with people, what you do in your work at the university and beyond. And it's just lovely to have someone like you, very accomplished human being, so diverse, so capable, yet so humble and inspiring. So I hope that wasn't too much of a grand introduction, but
Yeah, I'd love to.
welcome, Dill. Thank you for being
Thanks.
with us.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I loved your previous podcast to listen to someone who has a PhD in mindfulness.
Mm,
It's incredible.
mm,
Yeah, and I suppose my PhD is in empathy.
right.
Which we can talk about in a bit. But yeah, I'm very excited about the deeper retreat and deepest retreat. Is it the deepest
It's
retreat
the
or
deepest now. Yeah.
the deepest? Yeah. So the deeper retreat was really fantastic. I actually just needed a retreat and then ended up kind of co-facilitate, but it was more just kind of an experiment to kind of get in touch with old practices I hadn't worked with for quite some time. And
Mm,
the social sculpture work was really amazing.
mm,
Um, yeah, and it was really lovely to have a space to kind of build community and to kind of work with those invisible materials, sculpt those invisible materials of empathy and intuition and
right.
creativity and imagination. Yeah,
It's
it was really beautiful.
it's interesting things to talk about. I mean, you like look at the words, invisible materials, and it's like already you're like, what? So let's start off maybe with like a simple. Um, well, it's not so simple, but maybe it's a little bit straightforward. Like, what do you do, Dill? What would you? You've got such wonderful words that you describe with what you do. If you were to like summarize it, what do you facilitate? What is your?
Well, I mean, technically, I have a PhD in environmental education and educational sociology, but with a focus on art and the role of art, particularly in art activism and art in promoting kind of social learning as opposed to the learning that we have. So yeah, my specialization is thinking about learning and
Right.
education, but I think first and foremost, I practice as an artist. Um, and I practice in very kind of traditional artistic ways. I love to paint, I love to draw and collage, but I don't, I like to think of it more as like multimedia artists, in the sense that I like to work with all kinds of materials. And I'm very inspired by the work of Joseph Beuys, an artist from in the 70s, who was kind of rethinking Germany after the war, and kind of thinking about restorative justice and restoring and healing society, and thinking about the social tissue that kind of exists. You know, it's really a tissue, like a flesh, or kind of it has the sculptural quality, this thing that's between us.
Right.
And it's invisible to our eyes unless you start looking and noticing how culture is created, how society emerges and reflexively grows together. So I think that my focus, or in a nutshell, what I'm interested in is sculpting the space between people, using heritage and art and storytelling.
Beautiful. And I mean, I found, you know, that's when we had that first phone call. I don't know if you can remember it. I remember it pretty well.
Yeah.
And I had, at that point, just put together kind of what has now become Original Condition.
Yes.
And it's based on kind of 3 interconnected cogs of what I call the space you hold, the space you create, and the space where we meet.
Yes.
And I remember describing that to you, and we were like, whoa, we're kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And chatting to Lucy last week, and obviously all the people who inspire me, teachers who I've studied with, people who I practice with, who I collaborate with, and who have contributed so much to my life, and I hope maybe in some small way I've contributed to theirs. There's just this kind of, this deep sense of listening, and a sense of connection that I think is a kind of overriding theme throughout all of this. You know, when you mentioned that guy in Germany, you know, there's so much trauma and pain in the world, and which we've experienced this year particularly. And it's like, how do we, like you said, how do we heal from that, and how do we reconnect what was somewhat maybe even broken? And that's obviously where I'm very interested in you know, what you're saying with empathy, is that empathy, in the way that I kind of understand it, is a deep sense of listening. So yeah.
No, I think you're right. It was very exciting to see how we were doing things so similarly, and we were kind of called to respond to the same kind of coldness in society that needed warming up. Joseph Beuys, he has this quote saying, "Every human being is an artist," which is quite famous, you know, and a lot of people just quote that part of his quote. But the full quote is, he says, "Every human being is an artist, a freedom being with the capacities to transform the conditions that shape their lives." And that our truest kind of artistic practice is when we are transforming the conditions that shape our lives. So all the work that's been happening around restorative justice and contemporary justice around Black Lives Matter, to all the work that's happened in kind of dealing with equality around COVID and the huge injustices within COVID. Those contemporary things are deeply intertwined with long socio-cultural histories that we have to work with and detangle and warm up and make visible. But we do have these capacities to transform these invisible things. But it's definitely something you can't do alone. Which I really appreciated with our experiment, joining the Deeper Retreat team last year, was that how it really was building a kind of symbiotic creature of all of us working to try, you know, we had a loose framework, we had like a program, but what we were working with is this constant call and response between what the participants and everyone in the community was kind of needing, and then feeling it through, and then offering interventions or responses based on what we were sensing. And so when you talk about listening, it's a very active process. And I think we normally kind of fall into the state of a passive listening. We used to kind of just receiving information. But active listening really requires like an attentiveness. And, you know, when you say you gift your attention, you like, it really is a gift, you know, like it's something you have to really kind of, you know, wrap up nicely and offer someone like,
Totally.
yeah, I'm listening, I'm here. And, you know, you have your own tape recorder kind of recording your thoughts as you're saying them and what the other person's saying. And sometimes you have to just put those aside, like make post-it notes on your inside of your skull so that you can just focus and be with that person. Yeah, and I think that's like for me, there were three cornerstones of empathy, and the main one is attentiveness or deep active listening.
And I mean, I think that's where there's a really nice synergy, because my work is very much internal, meditation, going inwards, understanding yourself, your conditioning, your background, your beliefs, your narrative, the way that I think, the way that I breathe, the way that I move, the way that I feel in the body, and then which is that kind of the space I hold and the space I create, and then where is it that now two beings or more are now meeting in that space. And I found that was like a really nice synergy with the work that you do on a social level, and also your the work that you've done in terms of environmental awareness, how like our capacity to listen within, and then our capacity to listen externally, and I find like that symbiosis is crucial, because I find sometimes if I go, if I'm doing too me, my meditation, my movement, my history, my narrative, my story, it just becomes obviously just literally too self-centered. And then other times the kind of overcompensation of that is then I'm looking outwards, and I'm like looking to the world or looking to other people, and then that gets overwhelming. And so it's like finding this healthy dialogue, with myself and with the world, of being able to listen and be present and be active and recognize and realize that there's other people who are having their own experiences, and nature has a whole nother story to tell us as well. So yeah, I find that is really like a necessary thing, to have both that internal, the in to the out and the out to the in.
Absolutely.
Something you mentioned, and I just want to speak on this point before we go further deeper into the empathy. Something Lucy mentioned last week, such a great term, contemplative activism.
Oh, yes.
So she also does a lot of work with activists. And she was just talking about the ability, she was saying she's worked with a lot of activists who, of course, due to the nature of injustice and inequality, leads to violence, leads to burnout, these extremes that exist in our society, and that these people are on the front lines, trying to make changes and make differences and represent minorities, and how they a lot of them ended up burning out and needing like really deep psychological help as well. Yeah. And Lucy's done a lot of work with that. And so she drew up this beautiful thing called contemplative activism, which is very much what you were speaking about now, like this ability for us to listen to one another and hear one another.
Yeah, absolutely. There's L. Kaplan and Sue Davidoff, kind of long stalwart activists in South Africa, they also coined this phrase of delicate activism. Around kind of the really important work one needs to have in observation and like attentiveness in facilitating that contemplation. Like how are you staying with the issue, and then Donna Haraway calls it staying with the trouble, you know, staying close with the trouble and allowing yourself to be with the trouble. But then there's this work of reflexivity that's needed, and I think Al uses this image of a beehive, in that a beehive, if you think of it as a whole, is always outside and inside at the same time. That, you know, there's bees always outside, like exploring, collecting pollen, and there's always bees inside keeping the hive warm, and that there's this constant movement between, and deep communication, you know, they dance and speak to each other. But like if we imagine ourselves as hives, and then as a society as a hive, it's like trying to facilitate that constant flow of and that important work, you know, that work that is keeping things warm and fluid and flexible, and not getting stuck in like these like rigid inhumane economic plans or capitalism or racism, you know. It's this need to keep things flowing. And then in Africa, and in Southern Africa especially, you know, this, I've been really exploring this. I'm writing a paper now around the relationship between, you know, you were saying what we can learn from nature and then what we can learn from people. And like there's this beautiful relationship between the echolocation of whales and dolphins, and the kind of call and response singing in South Africa that we know so well, like you know, there's this tradition. There's this tradition in South Africa where you call out a song, and sometimes it's very intuitive and like freestyle, you know, and it's improvised. And you see it in the struggle movements. There's so much to learn from the struggle movements around how creative practice was used, but how you would sing a song or sing out a lament, and that would be responded to by the crowd, and it evolves together. So it's democratic, it's responsive to the trouble that's happening right now, and it's attentive, it's empathetic. And but then what whales and dolphins offer us is that they do this incredible thing where they send out a click. The click kind of caresses the environment that they're in, bounces back, gives them information of where they are in that moment, but then it goes dark and they have to click again, and then it's illuminated in their, you know, in their brain, and then they get this beautiful 3D X-ray vision of what's going on. And so it requires constant calling and responding, calling and listening, calling and listening, calling and listening. And they've actually developed this particular organ, which kind of sits where the third eye does in, you know, humans. It's called the melon organ. It's like an oil gland.
Did you say melon?
Melon, yeah, because that's what they have, that melon head.
Wow. And
it's got like it's got this. So what they do is it's like a lens, like you have a lens of an eye. It's able to focus sound.
Wow.
And so, you know, we keep getting talk about the third eye, and we need to develop this third eye, but actually we need to develop a third ear, like a third way of listening,
right?
Which is trying to distill and listen carefully, take a moment, pause, quieten everything out, and listen in the third space, you know, the space between this person's opinion and this person's opinion. There's a third place,
the space where
we
meet.
Yeah, it's like what Rumi says, like between or wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. Let's meet there.
Yeah,
something like that. Butchered that quote, but but there's this thing that I find so interesting, and I think that's the thing I'm always trying to refine and work with people to develop.
So that's like a really important point, I think, in what's going on, particularly in the world now, of like where do we meet? How like, you know, because like you spoke about the did you say the guy in Germany,
Joseph Beuys?
And you spoke about healing, you know, and it's like that's what the arts, that's what creativity is about. Creativity for me, you know, as like what I say, original condition is a creative movement practice, is a way to
Yes.
find solutions to solve problems, and you know, developing strategies in order to do that. And it has to start with a sense of like neutrality, a sense of deep listening to the body as it is, to the environment as it is, and then noticing my choices, my reactions, my responses, and how I engage with that. And that meeting space, I think that's what, I mean, without getting too idealistic, but it's like, is there a space where we can meet? You know, is there a space void of judgment and prejudice, and where we look at the trouble, we look at the injustice, we look at the suffering, we look at the pain, we look at all the tension but we make something new from that, and there's resolve and there's growth. And I think that's what I'm asking everyone in these podcasts is like, what can we do? You know, how are we going to make change? How can we allow that space to thrive?
Yeah, exactly. You know, we need new social spaces. We constantly do. I mean, this idea that culture is static is something we have to really break. We have to constantly be constructing new social arenas, new like amphitheaters to come together. I mean, that's what we've been doing in the amphitheater work. Is like creating amphitheaters for empathy, like new kind of open spaces where we can co-construct and develop, and in a way it's not devoid of leadership. Like we still need different kinds of leadership to hold those spaces and kind of innovation, but the kind of leadership is different. And in my PhD I was working with this idea of responsible participants that I kind of got real help with from Shelley Sachs, who was my co-supervisor at the time at the Social Sculpture Research Unit. And she kind of coined this phrase of responsible participants. And then I kind of really explored what does it mean to be a responsible participant, you know, and to become responsibly able, like response able, because it's actually about developing capacities to hold a space like that. And if you're going to open up a space like that, then it comes with huge responsibilities, but it's actually something that you can participate in. And so you're trying to the whole time encourage others to also become responsible participants in holding that space, both offering suggestions of what that new social space could be, and then also offering a way of holding it. Often actually, sometimes, especially for white South Africans, our work is actually to wait and to just open up, use our privilege and space to open up a space, and then just leave it actively absent. Also a term from Al Kaplan. But like a womb, you know, womb is mostly absent or like empty for most of its life, unless it's preparing for childbirth and then or creating a child. So it does this very hard work. I mean, we think about what women go through every month. Like their womb is constantly doing this incredible amount of work to keep a space actively absent for new things to emerge. And we need to do that same work in like using our privilege and our space and our practice and our empathy to kind of keep these wombs kind of like spaces open for healing, for transformation, for new opportunities. And I mean, like a very kind of difficult image of an example of that, which was really profound, was kind of during the Fees Must Fall protests of kind of white students making these kind of human shields around you know, their black comrades, and to protect them for the like transformation that was underway. Sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's much simpler and much quieter kind of opportunity to just open up a very small kind of conversational space, and you're just there to listen, and then all the things in between. And then with what I loved about the movement practice and the kind of creative movement in original condition, which I discovered last year, I mean, my experience of it really was, you know, that careful work. So there's the aspect where we do the kind of, what do you call it, contact improv, or
partnering,
the partnering work, where you exploring these different, the tensions of like pulling and pushing. And then there's that very delicate practice of kind of moving without touching and exploring the other person's body and the kind of space that the other person's body holds. There's something in that practice that allows for kind of developing a third ear, you know, it's developing a sensitivity of what does it mean to hold the space between two people. And it's really taxing work when you do that movement. You're having to carefully consider the other person. You're trying not to touch them. You're trying not to invade their kind of deep, most intimate space. But at the same time, you are acknowledging that. And it's beautiful. And I think it's a wonderful embodiment of that kind of term. It's no longer that concept. It's no longer abstract. I found in my experience of that movement work kind of really embodying what that meant.
I mean, I think that's a thing I've struggled with for so long. And I you know, during this time, and I mean, we had a conversation last week on the phone about, you know, like where things are at. And there's just such massive extremes, you know, in particularly in South Africa and in the world. And I said this last week with Lucy, like, I actually don't know if I did, but, you know, the virus has leveled the playing field. But what it's done in doing that is showed how unlevel the playing field is, you know? And I think that's brought up, it's brought up a lot of stuff for people. But what my concern is like, we have, you know, these extremes of left and right and all these massive contrasts. And people do have people do have a right to be angry and to be, you know, incredibly upset. And then, like, you know, we just have the complete shutdown of that, you know, so these forces just constantly smashing into one another. And it's just like, where is the room, you know, for like what you're talking about now, you know, because we've got someone yanking someone down or completely pushing someone over. And it's like, hey man, where's the meeting point? Like, how is that going to happen, you know, on a big scale, which is a big question, and people been asking this kind of thing forever, and it will probably continue. But do we just have to do what we do, you know, you doing what you're doing in your life, I'm doing what I'm doing, and constantly learn and constantly grow and create more of these spaces to learn? Because I just find these constant clashes, are they productive? You know, are they, I don't know.
I think they are. Like, I'm an activist. I didn't kind of say that at the beginning, but like, so I'm based in a university. I have a research position, so, but I don't have to teach so much, but I mean, I consider myself a scholar activist, right? So, and activism has a long history of violence.
Right.
And look, I'm not like a pacifist either when it comes to, you know, neither was Gandhi actually in the beginning of his career. I mean, he was quite adamantly, you know, people would, at the beginning of his career, would now classify him as a terrorist. But I think like there's a field of research called conflict transformation rather than conflict resolution, which actually looks at the idea that conflict, this is a lot of the work I was doing in Lebanon, but looks at the idea that conflict is conflict. It's not, I don't want to use the word necessary, but conflict is a reality.
Right.
Tension is a reality. Now, how you use that tension is the question. So if we think about Guy when he's playing the sitar, his sitar relies on the concept of tension. Like he can't make beautiful music without the tension of those strings, and just finding the right tension. And actually in social learning practice, we've come to realize that tension is actually the place in which true social learning happens. It is actually sometimes in kind of finding a disagreement or a disharmony and trying to find a new resonance between those two that actually social learning exists, you know, that, or there's an opportunity for social learning. So I'm not like advocating violence, but when you see the deep entrenched history of extreme violence and then the extreme silencing and the ways in which people of color in our history have been treated, or indigenous populations have been treated, like full-on genocide. I mean, just the Khoisan, I know we've spoken a lot about this, but the San, the Batwa, the Haikom, the Klam, just the ways in which that's been an ongoing and still existent kind of genocide that is silenced, that people are angry and have been hurt, and of course will respond when they need to violently back, when they've reached a point where there's no more space for dialogue. But then what happens is our fear of conflict and our fear of dissonance often makes people take away the opportunity for dialogue and learning. So like, oh no, let's not upset the apple cart, or to then just polarize it. And I mean, this week we've dealt with an incredibly difficult tragedy. So one of the projects I work on, the One Ocean Hub, we've been exploring and developing supporting activism around coastal users' rights and protecting the oceans from like oil and gas development. But there's this crazy thing that's happening in South Africa now around poaching and the pathologizing of poachers, or anyone who may be using a protected area for something, whether it's they're fishing or they're collecting traditional muti. There's now this extremism in the response to that, where everyone is now labeled a rhino poacher, and now there's the shoot to kill policy for rhino poachers. So there's no like court case, there's no like, and the newspaper keeps creating this myth machine where it says, 10 poachers killed this week by rangers, woohoo, like it's a win. But it's a kind of this, what I don't advocate is this kind of industrialized form of violence that kind of becomes complacent and actually just pits people against each other. The more important question is actually the huge dysfunction between up in government and between the marine protected areas and the land, the other protected areas, in communicating like, how do we train rangers to know the difference between people who are rhino poaching and people who are collecting medicine, you know? So, and it's the same in the work we did with street level drug addiction. You know, there was this pathologizing of users as kind of like zombies, and the media would kind of call them zombies or monsters. These are like highly vulnerable youth who've experienced like extreme trauma, and that wunga or street level heroin was the only thing that could get them through. It was like a solution to their problem, not a very good solution, but it was a solution to their problem. And actually the work we had to do was enter into that space of conflict, sit with it, and start finding opportunities for commonalities between, you know, how a policeman observes a user and thinks what a user is, and stopping that pathologizing of another human being, and actually starting to see like, oh, this is a mental health issue. It's not a crime issue. And so on.
Yeah, and that's a massive thing that's going on worldwide. I mean, and I think it, I don't know, do you know Frans de Waal? Have you seen his work?
No.
You'll probably one of his videos went like crazy viral, of these do you say Capuchin or Capuchin monkeys? Yeah, it went viral with the so he's a primatologist and a biologist. He's an amazing guy. His books are next level. Like Our Inner Ape is the really popular one. Our Inner Ape. And then I've got two of his other ones coming now, which is Age of Empathy, and the bonobo and the atheist. Um,
Oh man.
but he was talking of, he talks about what is like our inherited morality. And he talks about conflict, and he talks about aggression and violence, as we witness them in our relatives, in chimpanzees and bonobos and the other great apes. And then of course he talks about empathy and reconciliation and various forms of communication. But empathy is his big one. But he just explains the same thing with tension, as being the thing that can actually unify us. And it's when we get to like single pointed on the aggressive nature of humanity that we put ourselves in our own box then, or we're like, oh no, we're so nice, and everyone's, we spoke about this on the phone last week, where I was trying to explain, like, no, but like we're all one, like we're all, and you were like, yeah, but we're not the same, Dave. And I was like, but we are, but we aren't. And like embracing diversity, and like, and so, but if you get to like, no, but we're all like, it's all love, and it's like, no, it's not all love, there's
the reality is this deep long histories of oppression.
And that tension and pain and suffering is a part of the experience. And we have to hold spaces to understand one another more, and to like, so that people who are addicted to drugs aren't labeled as criminals, but who are actually, who need help. They need care, they need love and support, not to be beaten and thrown into jail for a night and be abused further and then released back. It's like, it's just madness.
No, absolutely. And I think that, so the point also, which is so interesting, is that, so this polarization we're seeing now, I mean, you see it in the US between, Democrats and Republicans. I mean, they've never been more apart than ever. And really, it's about one of our biggest flaws, and one of the biggest flaws of capitalism and the Western kind of project, is the idea of universalisms. And this idea that there is a universe, because there's not. There's a pluriverse, There's many different ways of knowing and being and doing, each with its own peculiar magic, also with its own downsides. There's no cosmovision that's perfect. There's no creation myth that's exactly right. Even the Big Bang has like huge holes in it. I mean, excuse the pun, but it really does. Like, it has this like, black holes. We don't understand what they are. We know that they're somehow, but then, so there's multiple ways of understanding reality. And there's an amazing philosopher, Roy Bhaskar, who talks about a laminated reality, that reality is laminated. And that he also describes and identifies and classifies different types of truth. The truth that in yourself as embodied truth, the truth that you and I are co-constructing by having this conversation, the truth that like you believe, even though it's completely warped, like Trump's idea of truth is completely bullshit, but that bullshit has like real consequences for the world. So his bullshit creates new truths, like economic decline, or like millions of people dying from COVID unnecessarily. And so we need to think about, I think one of the first most important steps is to allow ourselves to have multiple versions of truth. So when a Sangoma tells you that they've spent a year underwater developing deep knowledge of like Zulu mysticism and the practice and speaking with their ancestors, it's not important or necessary or even helpful to think about that literally or not. Like, is that true or not? It's that it's a deep truth that's helping create a whole area and body of knowledge that actually helps society in many interesting ways, and creates truths and opportunities for people to deal with all kinds of things, from mental health issues to actual practical, medicinal issues. And so, like, what we really need now, and there's another amazing thinker, D'Souza Santos, who talks about rather what we need is not trying to kind of dissolve the boundaries and make this kumbaya one. That's not actually helpful, because then comes in the question of power. Whoever has the most power will determine what the utopian kumbaya one is. And you look at any utopian story, there's like it's on the bridge of becoming dystopia, because it's usually, like in our case, like in apartheid, utopia was the most powerful person's perspective of utopia, which was kind of white upper class or white middle class. So the kind of the alternative, what D'Souza Santos says, is rather, what if we just made many entrances and exits between these universes? And our work is actually, and that's why art is so powerful, and movement and embodied practice, because what you're trying to do is create as many new entrances and exits. You're not trying to destroy the walls, because the walls are identity. They're identity for the LGBTQ plus world, which wants those walls up. They need their sovereign sacred space to kind of flourish. And so, you know, like it's the same in the Black Lives Matter movement, where you see the early mothers of the movement, when they were writing documents, they were saying, no, we don't want to assimilate. We want our peculiarness, you know, we want to be uncanny. And just because we're different and uncanny doesn't mean we are not striving towards a sustainable whole society that can function well. But a kumbaya whole is not actually helpful. And because if you're on the other side of the racialization, or if you're someone who's experienced like centuries of oppression, from your perspective, that kumbaya-ness is just it's just another space of elitism. And we see it in the New Age movement and in the yoga community, especially with spiritual bypassing and it being commodified and owned mainly by wealthy people. And a lot of the festivals are kind of, you see, they're very dominated by
and also like it's even, I mean, it's even in the older traditions of yoga as well, you know what I mean? That was extremely like
Brahmins,
exactly. So Dill, here's an interesting thing. I mean, so like with the truth thing, is then, because it brings up obviously a lot of questions around, like, you know, let's say the typical response, like within me particularly, is like, okay, what if then if someone's truth is destructive? Like, let's, you know what I'm saying? Like, like Trump. Like,
Trump's truth is very destructive.
Or whatever. Like someone's religious
truth was very destructive.
Someone's religious point of view, you know, that is very. What then? Like, how do we deal with that?
Well, so the truth is the one issue. The other issue is the power behind that truth. So how that truth gains momentum and gains power. So we saw how in the 2016 election in the US, like the ways in which, like now that we live in the post-truth world and the fake news world, was a product of who has power to sharing knowledge, and like the role of social media. And that new documentary, The Social Dilemma, kind of unpacks that, you know. But when it's just like an ecosystem, right? So if you've got a virus, or let's think about in the context of COVID, or like in a virus in the body, the more diverse your genetics are, the more kind of different types of gene heritage you have, the more likely you are to survive a pandemic, because your immune system and your genetic code is more diverse. You have less kind of, and the same in like an ecosystem or a forest. So like the more higher biodiversity, the more opportunities there are for like an invasive species to be held back. So it's actually in the kind of collective, in the pluriverse of these different truths, the more space and legitimacy and equality we offer, and equity we offer to those spaces for expressing their truth, the safer the whole system is for one truth to dominate the others. Does that make sense? That's what he's meaning by like making multiple entrances and exits. And so you're wanting to it's actually the danger. What we need to democratize knowledge making, which in a way social media has done, but because the social media sits and owned by big conglomerates and big corporates, and is the actual technology that is used is a single truth that was held by a single body. It's just like the food industry as well. Then you've got this issue where so the question is not so much about the truth, because like the truth, many truths exist out there. It's more about what are the systems or the machinery that's offering power to that truth more than another truth. Mm-hmm. And actually our big question is to deconstruct power. And each of us has to be kind of quite attentive to think, looking at behind the curtain and seeing like who's operating, like the Wizard of Oz, like who's actually operating the machinery.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do that now.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
That's the big question. So, Dill, I mean, I know you've got some time constraints, and we've dived pretty deep. So maybe to bring it back, I don't know if you want to wrap up with anything, or maybe show a little bit more of like.
Yes,
because these are beautiful big discussions, and everyone should be having them around the world. But how do we bring it?
Yeah. So I think the thing that so for the past, it's over a decade now, like 15 years, I've been working with this work around what empathy is. And I think just the point is, I don't want to say that I'm romanticizing empathy. There's a dark side to empathy, which we haven't gone into. The militarization and weaponizing of empathy, like the most wars are kind of driven by using empathy and exploiting people's empathy. Like the Gulf War was used as a really good example in how Bush used it.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is something that this is what I was saying is like, this is what I've been wondering the whole time, is like you just said, the dark side of empathy. And
everything has its shadow.
Yeah, totally. So just carry on with.
Yeah, so I think what I've been working with for many, many years is trying to see when is empathy useful and how can empathy be used, but also how can empathetic practices remain accountable and responsible when being used, because it can be turned into a weapon like any great power.
Yeah, because so this is what I was kind of saying, is that the one of the simplest ways I kind of understand empathy is like in terms of sympathy. People generally, I mean, a way that I've heard someone describe it is that empathy is more feeling with, and sympathy is feeling for. And so feeling with gives a sense of like a connection and like that social tissue, whereas feeling for is there's a very kind of an idea, like a separation.
But so the feeling with requires sorry, Karen.
No, carry on.
No, I was saying the feeling with though in order for it to not become weaponized, the feeling with needs to be done with holding two things at the same time, like kind of two birds' wings. The one side, you needing to kind of silence your own inner voice so that you can stay with that other person fully, almost without judgment, which is extremely difficult. And it's hard work. And then on the other side is listening also to that's why, so the three aspects that I've explored is attentiveness, imagination, and intuition. And like on the other side, you need to imagine, like really. So this is why I'm so interested in storytelling, because when I tell you something like, my gran was a wonderful woman, she had the kindest eyes, she had all these beautiful gold bracelets, and they always made this incredible sound through the house. You've just done all this work to picture my grandmother, and like you've imagined this woman that you might not have met or seen, but you can start, or you've got slight images from your intuition of maybe I saw pictures of her, and you construct this image of. So you're doing this work of being an artist. You're like imagining and creating images in this space, wherever it sits consciousness. You're making all these images to stay with me. And so that's why I said so active. You have to silence, create a womb in an open space to create this emergence for a picture of another being. If we're not doing that, and we are just, if we are not trying to keep them quite separate and clear, it becomes a bit of a muddle in ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we only half empathize, or we'll jump to conclusions, or we'll quickly start pathologizing. Oh, all Black people are like this, all gay people are like this, based on just a little bit that we'd empathize with them. But actually, just like the whale, it's a constant thing. Like you got to constantly calling and responding forever.
Right.
Like it doesn't end. It's
Well,
you will never have a whole picture of what another human being is. You have a constantly emerging and transforming picture.
Sure.
Like a whale has.
And a constantly transforming picture of yourself, right? Of the self.
Yes.
Because, and this is where I think our work is very complementary, because you know, what I like, that's what meditation is, right? That's what mindfulness is this observation of your identity and of yourself and of your persona and of your ideas, and doing your best not to judge it, to observe it. But sometimes you do need to critically discern, you know, you need to and hold, like you said, hold those two, I quite like the analogy of the wings, but so that there is that, like we said, that new space that opens up. And
exactly.
so where this comes with like the dark side and the weaponizing is, and what I've been thinking a lot about is social media and the news and these kinds of things, because if empathy, right, is an inherent capacity, like in mammals, and it is, well, and not just mammals, but in animals, and it's happening like all the time, and we might not just, we're not conscious of it, and there's this feeling with, and we're being like pulled by so many different, you know, you see so many different things on, whether it's television or the internet or social media, and like you feel it, you know, you really feel, at least I do, like, you know, you watch these things and you're like, holy, you know, whoa, like this is powerful stuff, you know, emotion is powerful and belief is powerful, and it can completely pull you. And like you said, you know, what are now this is where obviously the conspiracy theories can go bananas in terms of like agendas and power and all that kind of thing. But what I'm more trying to say is like, I completely see how empathy can be used as a weapon, you know, because emotion is so powerful.
And it's our primary kind of, you know, when you watch these little ducklings like just know instinctively they need to jump out of a tree, or you watch like wildebeest born on the plains and they suddenly know how to run. For humans, our most instinctive thing we are born with is empathy. It's like it's part of our DNA, unless you're a sociopath or have like severe mental illness. But it's one of our like basic qualities. And so just like anything, it can be turned, it has a dark and a light side, and we have to be very attentive to use it in the right way. And the best way to use it is socially, like that it's kept in check by others, and that and I'm not just saying the human, it's also the more than human, like our relationships with animals, oceans, rivers, mountains, they all commune with us through empathy. And so we can learn, they're all our mentors in helping us refine empathy, and not allowing us to go to the dark side, you know.
But like you said though, the dark side is part of it, right? Like inevitably you have to go there, you will go there, we do go there, whether it's in dreams or whether it's just in your own process, or you get exposed to something, you know, that is extremely traumatic, or, you know, life is just, it's so this is the thing, is I guess a nice way to wrap it up could be like, how do we utilize it as a tool? So you spoke about intuition, imagination, and listening,
Attentiveness.
attentiveness.
Listening.
So how do
Same
you
thing, yeah.
how do you cultivate that? How do you keep that in check?
Yeah, so to try listen without judgment. Judgment doesn't help anyone, you know, unless it's even in the legal system, and the legal system's so flawed. But yeah, who am I to judge? Is basically the kind of thing. Like you have no right to judge anyone. And that can be taken to quite an extreme point. You know, everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt, you know. So that empathy is not, there's no end product. Like you're never going to have a complete picture. You'll never know what that person's truth is, but you can get quite close. If you work hard, you can get quite close. And we know it in our relationships. Just think about how complex a romantic relationship is.
Right.
How much you know that person, but you still don't know them. So you always, and that the person's allowed to change. And, you know, this cancel culture we see now in society, like there's no opportunity for transformation if we keep canceling everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So
there's
a little something there on the attentiveness / listening without judgment, right? Which is very much the process of self-inquiry in terms of mindfulness and meditation, to observe and witness and listen without judging and analyzing. But then there does need to, like you said, be, and I mean, I'm not saying you made a judgment, but by saying that, by saying not judging, that's not a judgment, but that's like a decision. That's like a critical choice. So it's like, is there room there for critical thinking or discernment or some type of, like you're open and you're listening, but you're not condemning, and you're not.
So this is where I like to make the distinction between judgment and intuition.
Okay.
And why I like to think of empathy as a creative practice rather than like critical thinking or any other kind of way of framing it, is that it's art making. I mean, you're creating pictures in your mind of what the world is and what others are, right, through empathy, right? So, but if you imagine that you're going to make an artwork that never finishes, then you'll be kind of down the middle, you know, like my relationship with you as a friend and as a partner in our work together is, it's never ending, you know. And so that the pictures that I'm constructing of you, I'm making a very kind of complex image, multifaceted image of and feeling of you, a story of you, but I always keep an opening for that story to change. Right. So you're giving the person opportunity for that process. And so why intuition is so important is there's something else at play that we don't fully understand. And I mean, part of it, you know, we can look at intuition in the very like hocus pocus sense around like being a psychic or clairvoyant. But I'm more interested in this kind of gathering of all these images and all these pictures. We have this, our whole body, somehow, brain, mind, body, whatever, has this ability to kind of get a sense like this is right and this is wrong. And then you move with that sense, just like you do in the movement practice. You're like, now I move here, now I move. There's like an immediate knowing that this is so rather like trust one's intuition or become apprentice to your intuition, and then trying to just make judgments all the time.
Right. Totally.
And that will help. Like I think it helps with practicing empathy in a more useful way, you know.
Yeah. And I think like such an interesting example there for me that comes to mind is like, unless you are a sociopath or you are suffering from mental illness, in which case there's room for that, of course, but most humans, if they use their intuition, they're not like imagining, you know, like this river full of plastic flowing into an ocean full of dead fish. You know what I mean? No one who wants that. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, and no one's like imagining hurting the person that they're having this conversation with, like, so that's what I find so beautiful about intuition. Like, the body wants to live, right?
No.
Like it
Yeah.
we want to live. That's why I love movement, obviously, because when you move, you're not trying to hurt yourself. You know what I mean?
No.
Even if you're like pushing yourself and you like really like, you know, some people just love lifting heavy things, and there is something very exhilarating about that. Or like you love running, you know, and you run and you're burning and you're sweating and you're breathing, but it's not because you want to hurt yourself. It's like,
you feel alive.
Yeah.
You in the moment, you presence, you're mindful.
Okay, so that then leads to imagination.
Yes. So let me just show you some of the things. I've got some stuff open here to just kind of whistle through quickly. If I got it right, let's see. Are you seeing this? If I change between things, can you see them?
Yeah, so now we're on...
so this is just my website, dylanmcgarry.org, and you can see some of the practices. And I just want to show this recent artwork I did with my friend Cesar Mhlangu, where we kind of tried to, it was a performance piece where we sat for an hour. I made these glasses, which try to create this third ear, right? So there's a lens here that's got quartz crystal in. And then we just spent an hour working through not speaking or, just looking into each other's eyes. But we then reflected afterwards just the profound experience we had of staying with each other, how much work it took to stay with each other. And we have these lines at the back, and you'll see kind of how mismatched we are. And we didn't know this until right near the end, when we looked at the recording, how aligned we became. Like the lines between our noses, our eyes, our chins, it just happened naturally that we became completely in sync. We moved less, our breath became the same, but there was still a deep uniqueness between us. And I mean, this work was really around exploring the conversation that needs to happen between, I mean, this was a queer piece, but it was also around restorative justice in South Africa, and the conversations that need to happen between white and black bodies.
So beautiful. But were you guys standing or sitting?
We were sitting.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to show you. So
what I love, just one more thing I'd love to, like, and it's so cool that people can see this when they watch it, and they can obviously go watch the whole thing by themselves. But like, you actually connected there. You know what I mean? And that tension there with that, like, that's, I can imagine, because I've done something similar with another like object, and that feeling of like, you can feel their movements and they can feel yours, and like, you don't want the glasses to like slip or pull. It's such a great...
I know. And I sat and worked with an optometrist to help me make these, and they were so delicate. So we had to be very sensitive to each other, because if we pulled too much, they would just break.
Right, exactly,
So, and then I just wanted to show you, so this work really began for me. So this is the Institute of Uncanny Justness, which I co-founded with Saskia Vermeulen. And it's a space where we've been exploring reimagining learning, activism, and justice through kind of what we call suitably strange creative practice.
That's my favorite.
This class, I've got a whole thing on suitably strange, which I won't get into now, but this cloth was my PhD. And so basically it was an oiled cloth that I created with Shelley Sachs, and we traveled 17 towns on a train, creating that space with mayors of towns, teachers, children, farmers, farm laborers. I'll show you some footage of that train. It's a very young Dill. So we created a train. This was my PhD work, which traveled around the country, and the Earth Forum was one aspect of it. And people sat around together holding aspects of Earth, and we looked at land and restorative justice and around land rights in the country. But every time they put a soil on the cloth, it would leave a stain, and we would take that forward. So now the cloth kind of has, here it is. I won't get it out now, but it's the cloth has like thousands of people's voices kind of embodied in it. So there was, it's important, I feel like, and this is a point of Joseph Beuys, no matter what you're doing, you must always be making things to embody and hold that process. So in this case, it was the cloth, and it was the train, which, you know, traveled around the country, and we gathered, so it's quite bad old footage, but this is Mbali Vilakazi. So we had different artists on the train. We had poets, she's a poet. We had visual artists, we had theater makers, and everyone was exploring this concept of active, attentive listening. And our original name for the train was the listening train, but it became the climate train just because the funders wanted to call it that, because we were looking at environmental issues. And then eventually the train got to COP17, the climate conference in Durban at the end, and we were able to present the oil cloth as like an alternative to a signatory process.
Right.
So making these kind of uncanny, suitably strange objects opens up like opportunities for kind of restorative justice.
Yeah.
So yeah, so someone just speaking and holding through and reconnecting to their place and their relationship to land. So that work then led me to when I met Neil, and I had the kind of amazing magical relationship that I do with Neil, is now my closest friend. We created Amphitheater. So you can see this on amphitheater.com, which if I can use the last 5 minutes to just show a little video which explains a lot of what we've been speaking about in practice.
Yeah, totally. Let's the signal seems to have gone a bit. Let's give it a try, Adil. Obviously that would be the perfect way to wrap it up.
You know what, let me just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna just check that I shared it with yeah, I did. Optimize for video clip. There you go. Sorry. And then
yeah, because when we were talking at you started to lag a bit, so
okay. So
they're onto us, man. They're taking away our bandwidth.
So can you see this video, the beginning of the documentary?
It's looking promising. I'm hoping it's going to work.
Okay.
Complex problems in unequal societies require careful yet rigorous explorations of different ways of knowing, being, and doing. When popular and political debates are polarized and filled with judgments, entangled livelihoods and marginalized voices are often ignored. It's why we believe that creative and empathetic methods can facilitate multiple forms of listening to and sharing knowledge across diverse publics. Amphitheater is one such method. Emerging from the South African context, Amphitheater has, over the past 5 years, developed innovative new ways of constructing social spaces for equitable public dialogue. Creating an amphitheater for empathy that embraces, rather than shies away from, complex entanglements in society. Since 2014, the Amphitheater team has tackled social concerns ranging from land-based mining and displacement, street-level drug addiction, the vulnerability of migrant women and the impacts of xenophobia, gentrification and public housing conflicts, and more recently, ocean heritage and governance. Amphitheater nurtures not only public storytelling, but attentive story listening. This research-based theatre method offers a new form of participatory justice in decision-making, meaning-making, and solidarity building across societal spheres. The amphitheater process begins with extensive action-based research. Here, the creative team, co-participants, and key partners work to identify matters of critical concern for social justice and together define a pressing central question. The Amphitheatre team then set out to explore this question with as many people from diverse backgrounds as possible, listening to multiple narratives that relate to the topic from different scales and positionalities, interrogating archives, and reading broadly. The creative team then bring these findings together and works to shape the research into an engrossing, relevant, and true-to-life theatrical script. The initial iteration of the script is first shared with participants and partners in table readings and other formats to test and verify the credibility of the play. The Amphitheatre team then devise and rehearse a theatrical production and share this again with relevant knowledge holders from a variety of backgrounds. In this way, the team are continuously enriching and verifying the research. Once the project collaborators are happy with the production, performances are rolled out to strategic audiences across the country. Policymakers, participants, and other concerned publics are invited to sit together and experience the production. Amphitheatre audiences are generally made up of people with different levels of agency, power, and privilege in relation to the matter of concern being explored in the play. Ideally, invited audience members should hold diverse, even conflicting views on the central concern represented. Post-play conversations are then carefully facilitated as public dialogues between the audience, the actors, and playmakers, allowing for yet another layer of research in consultation with the public to emerge. Since its inception, Amphitheatre productions have reached thousands of South Africans. With performances opening international conferences, community meetings, and theatre festivals. Venues for amphitheatre performances have ranged from state-of-the-art theatres and art galleries to church and school halls, police stations, football fields, aquariums, rehabilitation centres, and homeless shelters. Across these various processes, Amphitheatre works to amplify a chorus of voices, particularly those of marginalized groups, with and for our non-academic research partners, in powerful and validating ways. Moving forward, Amphitheatre is expanding into international policy dialogue as well as further grassroots engagement, aiming to deepen and enrich our ability to support democratic decision-making processes. If you would like to join these efforts, get involved, donate, or learn more, please visit our website at www.amphitheatre.com.
Yeah, so just to say that, just to end that point was that, you know, the work that we've been developing in Amphitheatre has really happened because of Neil and Mpume. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to find just want to go back to where I was. And I just wanted to quickly give them a shout out, who co-founded Amphitheatre with us.
Right.
So Mpume and Tumbeni and Neil Coppen, which this wouldn't have been possible without. So we co-created, and then it's a huge team. And I think the point here, so there's Neil Coppen, one of South Africa's beloved playwrights, and Mpume Mtumbeni, one of South Africa's favorite performers. Oh, why won't it scroll now? Anyway, but yeah, and then it's a whole host of people. So the point really is that developing these kinds of practices or empathy-based practices requires collaboration. And I mean, just coming back to the deepest retreat and what we are exploring, you know, hopefully at the end of this month, I mean, in December, is you know, every time we do it, there's new, just like with Amphitheatre, new opportunities and openness for creating new spaces together. And I think that's the thing I love most about it, is you both need empathy to practice this collaboration, but also the collaboration itself helps you create new instruments for empathy. You know what I mean?
Sure, totally, yeah.
So yeah, just a wonderful shout out to the incredible suite of people that are behind Empathy Theatre and the work we do there.
No, it's powerful. It's goosebumps stuff. Like the whole 5 minutes, you just like,
And that's Neil's voice narrating it there.
yeah. But it really is. I would love to. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity yet, but would love to be a part of it and witness it. And
yeah,
like I mentioned to you, I do have I do love to act.
yeah.
that for another time. But that work is just so powerful, and I encourage the listeners and watchers to go and check it out. And I'm sure you guys have got some things up your sleeve coming up.
Yes, we've got some very exciting stuff coming up. COVID didn't hold us back. We did manage to present our radio, which you can find also on the website, to the UN, and we invited next year to go perform to 2 UN assemblies.
Wow.
And we performed to Parliament before, but the real work is all the work we do in grassroots spaces.
Yeah.
And, the performances in soccer fields and
Totally.
schools.
Yeah.
But and then we've got some other exciting stuff. Also, working with Mark Monahan on an animation where we're exploring kind of making intangible heritage more tangible to support coastal justice for variety, particularly in this case for traditional healers, and then a variety of other stuff, which I won't go into, but you can find it on the websites.
Very nice, wonderful, Dill. I really, really appreciate the conversation, and it needs to happen more on all levels, and I'm just grateful that we get to share, and I hope the people have found it as interesting as I did.
No, thank you so much. It was so lovely to also think through these ideas with you. It's always so amazing to chat.
Yeah,
and go deep.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the point, is that the more we practice what we're preaching, the more we learn, and
exactly.
That's and to not be afraid of the sensitive, the blind spots, the tension, the fear, and to know that we can talk about it, and that that's what needs to happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
We can't keep sugarcoating things. We can't keep hiding, and it's just it also not to, because I think a lot of people with a lot of these sensitive topics, there is a whole host of emotions that come with them, and people want to feel safe, to have these conversations, and that's where that judgment needs to be suspended. So really appreciate you and what you're doing, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. See you in December.
Yeah. So thank you, Dill.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too.
Big
Lots of
love, brother.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too. Cheers, Dill.